All right, gentlemen, let's move on to our second topic, which is the Middle East and the violence, escalating violence in Syria. Stan, since you are an ambassador in Foreign Service, why don't you briefly tell us what your take is on the deteriorating situation there with Assad and also the health issues related to Mubarak of Egypt?
Well, with respect to Syria, what you're seeing is the newest phase of a long-term internal struggle between the Sunni, who make up the majority of Syrian population, and the Alawites, who are a kind of a tangential offshoot of Shiite Islam, who are the ruling small minority. And they have been ruling now for several decades. Bashar al-Assad, the current president's father, Hafiz al-Assad, was just as red-handed as his son has turned out to be, except he was more effective and more efficient.
Is this a feudal system, or is this just basically a dictatorship?
No, it's just a dictatorship. It's a military dictatorship in which all of the important positions in the military and the secret police and other forms of security, media and what have you, are filled by Alawites who are loyal to Bashar al-Assad and the al-Assad family.
Now, how carefully do we have to tread on this, and we'll get to you, Bobby, in a second, with the fact that, Russia supports the Assad government? What does that do for us in terms of our own safety and the foreign affairs?
No, it has no impact on our safety. We and the Russians are not going to engage in any kind of confrontation over Syria. What it does mean is that it would be impossible for the United Nations Security Council, for example, to impose any kind of serious sanctions on Syria, because the Russians and the Chinese would prevent it.
Now, Mubarak, quickly, his health has deteriorated significantly. As viewers may know, he was convicted of being behind the killings with the demonstrations.
Failing to prevent them in any event.
Failing to prevent them. The fact that he wasn't executed, what does that say, Stan?
It says that the military is still in control of events in Egypt, or at least they're in control of the government. The revolution in Egypt, that part of the Arab Spring that took place, all the masses in Tahrir Square and that sort of thing, was begun by groups of idealistic students who cried out for democracy and that thing. But these are people who have no particular influence in Egypt. Those who are influential in Egypt are the military, who control, obviously, the armed forces, but also control most of the important businesses in Egypt, having been in power for decades, and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is very well organized, especially in Upper Egypt, but in a great number of cities.
That's more of a militant aspect of what would be government-oriented, right?
They are more fundamentalist Islam.
Fundamentalist, that's what I meant.
They're divided into several segments, some of which claim to be not especially militant, not especially fundamentalist, but the fact is that should the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood, come to power in Egypt, they would, in my opinion, move to institute Sharia and otherwise to shift Quran. That is Quranic law.
Well, let me stop you there, and Bobby. Obviously, Stan is above our pay grade when it comes to definitions of these peoples in the Middle East. But from your point of view, you were telling me earlier you get most of your information on this by reading the Wall Street Journal. What most counts to you in terms of where this thing is going in the Middle East with the bloodshed?
Well, first of all, I'd like to see the bloodshed end. The loss of life has been horrific. Women and children, men, of course. I would like to see some solution found, get everybody at a table if at all possible. I don't know if it's possible at this point. But again, I defer any expertise, etc. to Stan, which I told you prior. I'm just like my average citizen in New Smyrna Beach or any place in Volusia County. Just trying to make things get by day and keep an eye on what's going on there and how it's going to impact us. I do worry about the impact on Israel because that will have a direct bearing right on us directly.
Stan, does this benefit Israel? This tearing apart of these governments? Or does this hurt Israel?
Well, with respect to Egypt, it's quite damaging to Israel. Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt. That's what the whole Camp David Accord was all about. And
But this
the
brother,
fact of that peace treaty has enabled Israel not to have to keep a massive military presence on its Egyptian border. The Egyptians, if they were an opponent of Israel, would be the strongest of its Arab opponents. And so it has really provided a lot of relief for Israel over the years. They can't be sure that that condition is going to continue.
well, quickly, so we end this segment. What does this all mean in terms of Iran right now? Because they've been quiet and in the background, and you know they're lurking. Where do you go with that?
Well, the Iranians have over the years provided some assistance in some areas to the Muslim Brotherhood, but their primary concern is not Egypt, it is Syria. Syria, because, as I say, they're Alawite, they're related to the Shia philosophically, and the Iranians are 12 Shias. There is a certain natural anti-Sunni bond between the two of them. They have cooperated in a variety of ways, weapons supplies, nuclear information, that type of thing over the years. And they have cooperated in their support of terrorism, particularly the Hezbollah in Lebanon,
Right.
which has struck Israel with rockets and that sort of thing. So if Syria should fall and come under control, let us say, of a strong Sunni government, this probably would hurt Iran to some extent, because they could not count on the same degree of cooperation with a Sunni government, which would be more inclined toward the other Sunni states of the region.
Now, what's the other one, Sunni, and what's the other major?
The Shia?
The Shia,
Yeah.
okay. Let me ask you this, because Bobby made a good point. You know, we live in Volusia County, we live in New Smyrna Beach, you live in Daytona Beach Shores. It's a world away, halfway around the world. But if this went into a full-scale civil war kind of thing, that crossed boundaries in these different governments with the different ethnic and militant powers to be, wouldn't that impact oil, and wouldn't that impact the global economy much more so when it become more chaotic?
Well, Syria doesn't produce any oil.
Right.
However, there are a couple of pipelines from
But
Iraq.
Egypt does.
Yes, but not a great deal. There are a couple of pipelines that pass from Iraq through Syria to Mediterranean ports, and there is also a pipeline coming up from Egypt that goes through Syria. It would have a minimal effect on the price of oil, nothing that couldn't be handled by increased production.
What
from
if Saudi Arabia
and
were drawn into this?
I don't see that happening.
They got too much of a stronghold on the people there.
Well, it isn't just that. The Saudis have their own internal problems, but not problems which are affected by what's going on in Syria to the degree that it would create problems for the Saudis. They're much more concerned about Iran.
Well, with that, we'll move on to our next segment in a moment.